Namaste and welcome everyone. My name is Dheeraj Mehra. I'm the director of Notre Dame's Global Center here in Mumbai and a fellow alumnus from the class of 1996. I want to welcome you today and thank you for your active participation in this ongoing global dialogue discussing the worsening water crisis. In the past two sessions, we traveled to Nairobi with Professor Ellis Adams to explore environmental policy and governance in Malawi, and then to Ireland with Professor Andrew Kennedy to understand coastal boulder displacement on the west coast of Ireland. It is our endeavor to continue these important conversations discussing the worsening global water crisis by building a virtual community and connecting with all of you as a global audience to reflect upon the material we present. We hope that your experience with this series continues to be insightful and engaging, and that you are connecting not only to us here at ThinkND, but also to the global community engaged in this series. The continued support that this global dialogue series has received from Notre Dame International, the Office of the President, the Notre Dame Alumni Association, and our various colleges and units on campus has been a mark of the university's commitment to being a leader in discussing this pressing global need of humanity. Today, I welcome the opportunity to discuss the impact of sea level rise on the coastal city of Mumbai, the city where I'm from, and its impact on 23 million inhabitants of the city. We will also understand how the work of Professor Krupali Krusche and her colleagues will help mitigate an otherwise dire prediction by the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. The IPCC AR6 report released on 9th August of last year spelled out how urbanization has pushed up intense rainfall in cities across South Asia, using several scientific pieces of evidence generated on these Indian cities. The report builds on an analysis by NASA predicting that several Asian cities located either on or near the coastline would have to withstand significant sea level rise by the year 2100. The report further warns that global temperature may rise by up to 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 2 decades because of climate change. This would result in a rise in sea levels, which may inundate low-lying areas globally, with Mumbai being highlighted as one of the large global coastal cities that will be affected by this rise in sea level. Recognizing this as a call to action, Professor Krupali Krusche has been working with researchers across continents to better understand the situation on the ground and possibly provide sustainable mitigation urban planning measures to prevent such a disaster. Over the course of this discussion, we hope to bring forth the concerns that have emerged over the past few years and Professor Krupali's work going forward. Before I introduce her today, please remember that if you have any questions for her, you can submit them using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. This will allow us to facilitate the questions as effectively as possible, and we'll try and find time to answer as many of them, just given the time constraint. When we promoted this event, we shared a few pre-recorded videos that were posted on ThinkND, where Professor Krupali discussed a few themes from the reading. For those of you who have not had a chance to watch it, I really recommend going back to ThinkND and taking a look. Krupali Uplekar Krusche is the Associate Dean at Notre Dame School of Architecture and Director of DHARMA, the Digital Historic Architectural Research and Material Analysis Research Team. She teaches urban and architectural design and digital documentation at the School of Architecture. Since 2007, she has founded and directed DHARMA, research specializing in 3D documentation of World Heritage sites using advanced mapping techniques. Since 2008, the team started its first major project by documenting 4 Renaissance age major tomb monuments in India, one of them being the iconic Taj Mahal, in partnership with the Archaeological Survey of India, or the ASI. In 2010, she and her team started documenting the world-renowned Roman Forum in partnership with, and please just pardon my pronunciation, this is a very difficult set of words to say, the Soprintendenza Speciale per i Beni Archeologici di Roma, or known better as PARCO, Ministry of Heritage and Culture, and the Archaeological Service of Rome. A 3D exhibit and international conference called The Digital Future of World Heritage was conducted in partnership with the United States Embassy in Italy, NASA, UNESCO, and the Italian Ministry of Cultural Heritage in 2014. Both projects are part of the 4-year agreement with the World Heritage Center of UNESCO. Now I'd like to welcome my colleague and dear friend, Professor Krusche from the School of Architecture to talk to us about our topic today, the impact of of the rise in sea level in Mumbai. Professor Krusche, let's just start us off with one underlying question I think that everyone would like to know better. What is sea level rise? How is it really affecting us all?
Namaste, first of all. I would like to say hi from Rome, where I am right now, and thank you for taking the time and being with us today. To start with your question, sea level rise is a growing problem that is concerned with two issues. One is the glacial melt that's creating the rise in sea levels generally, but also the increase in temperature that's surrounding us. And this temperature rise is expanding the volume of the water and the way in which the water behaves. And thus we have the rising sea level creating an impact on the different cities that are based on the coast. We also have cities that have developed over many years, even decades and centuries, and these cities have been in low-lying areas. So the cumulative effect of sea level rise plus the effect of low-lying areas of cities is what is causing the concern related to cities and the increase in water levels around them.
Thanks, Professor Krusche. I think sea level rise really is. But what's also important to us is, why are you interested in this area? What caused you to start thinking about moving from, archaeological sites and urban planning to really thinking about finding ways to help mitigate this using your education in urban design? Maybe if you can help us try and tell us why, this came in to be a part of your focus.
So Dheeraj, as you explained to everybody, I spent a decade examining digital documentation of heritage sites. This same technology, which is the LiDAR mapping method, is what is used also for understanding and adapting the way in which the sea behaves in relation to the land. And so when pandemic happened, I was stuck at my home for a year and a half without travel. And, when you are not traveling anywhere and you're busy at home and you're trying to understand what's your next step, the biggest thing in front of me was, what can I do to help our planet? What can my work mean for the larger or better, larger good of people around us? And this is when this whole thought process regarding how does the work that I do with digital documentation actually come together with the relationship of sea level rise and its impact in how the cities in the future will be developed. There are so many countries, including United States and cities in United States, that are facing this issue of sea level rise and is affecting very quickly the way in which we are going to plan our cities for the future. Presently, comprehensive planning is not something that is always taken into account, which basically means you are not just looking at how to do scientific research regarding the impact of the sea level, but also come up with comprehensive solutions related to it. So combining the two was a gap that I saw in the work that was happening. And of course, vulnerability exists around India and especially my hometown, Mumbai. And so that's where I started the contribution of the research in a place that was in one of the greatest needs around the world. Jakarta is in similar vein and has much difficult situations, but Mumbai too. So that's one of the reasons why I started here.
Yeah, I remember these conversations that we had, I think, when you were with your students in Mumbai for the studio project about sea level rise and about how, the city is going to face some issues with this. So just relating sea level rise to the city itself, how do you feel that, what is so unique about Mumbai that sea level rise by itself is going to pose such a big challenge to us going forward? What is it about Mumbai that really strikes as something important for us to think about?
So I'm presently on the NASA board of practitioners regarding sea level rise. They have a independent team of people that advise the NASA scientists regarding the tools that they are creating regarding sea level change. When we were examining these areas, we identified that there's concern related to many cities that are are in the next decade, by 2050 and by 2100, have varying impacts. And so if you can do an easy thing, and I'm going to share my screen for now. But before I do that, I'll say I became inquisitive and I started using the tool quite a bit. And I realized that there are some limitations to the NASA data sets. So going beyond, I looked at the NOAA data sets and also started examining all the kind of cumulative information that's out there. And what was interesting to find out is presently, while we have sea level information, the combined impact of what is causing concern around cities, especially in Mumbai, is the fact that it's the monsoon heavy rains, the flooding that is caused because of the rains, plus the sea level rise. The two together is creating the havoc that is going to concern the city in the future. And this information doesn't exist anywhere as a cumulative set of information. And that's one of the reasons why we started, investigating further on it. What has been very useful is since 2 years, we have a developing relationship with the Mumbai Port Trust. And as we do that, they have been very supportive and keen towards seeing how that's going to impact their site. And so one of the things we are looking at is how does the whole city of Mumbai behave? And how do specific areas that are planned for future development, how they are going to behave? So those were some of the things we looked at. Now I'm going to share with you a quick slide. Please bear with me on this. If you see here, this is a software called Climate Central. Now, again, each tool that's out there has some or the other limitations just because the data sets have been recorded in different ways. So the first question I started facing was, what is going to happen to the city of Mumbai? And if you see here, this is predicting the sea level rise just rising by a foot of water. And with a foot of water, the cumulative effect on the city of Mumbai is the red areas that are marked in the plan, which indicate that most of the city's core of the downtown area of Mumbai is going to get flooded. Now, this information was, at first, when I saw it, pretty scary to see. And you start immediately thinking, oh, is my house in here? Is it going to get affected? What's going to happen to people that are living here? And you're looking at a population of around 23 million people that live in Mumbai. And then when you look at this is not the whole city, this is just like the southern part of the city that you're seeing, but it would impact a couple of million people that would be in this vicinity of area. You're looking at around 1.5 million at least that get impacted directly from such a situation. So I needed to dig deeper because this is information that is coming out of tools that are combining information from satellite data. So the critical part is that satellite data is the informative tool right now used for sea level rise predictions. Again, these are predictions. So in predictions, they also have a range for the prediction. There's a low range and a high range, and then there's a medium range. These ranges are identified based on what they predict as the level of emissions that will exist around the world based on the ways in which these cities and these countries behave. So let's say we are going to cut down emissions around Mumbai dramatically, very quickly, and we're going to behave very well, then the number of years to get to the sea level rise is going to be prolonged. But if we continue the way we are, then there's like moderate to moderate high levels that we are imagining that things are going to be at. And at that point, you're already seeing what the condition will be. And this is where things started getting concerning. This satellite imagery tells us something that is going to indicate the predictability of something that is projected to around 2050. The problem with satellite data, though, is that it is not accurate under 1 meter data set. And that's because the information you collect is mostly from aerial data collection. It is not ground level data collection. Now, that creates gaps in, for example, the ways in which the land is, the way in which that land is behaving with the structures that are on top of it, and also the kind of foliage that's there. Now, there are many softwares that are used by scientists to clear out this information and to make this data set predictable. Still, there are gaps that we have seen. And so what our first part of our study is doing is we are doing ground level surveys that are going to allow us to get much more predictable information around the city's edges and how the contours of the city are behaving. Beyond that, also combining this with GPS data and also land subsidence data sets to get more comprehensive understanding of the cumulative impact of these three. And then the last data set that we collect is the flood mitigation. So areas that are flood prone and are most probable areas of water collection, and then combining those to create the best scenario of what would happen as a projection in the future years.
Wow, when I looked at this map, I think for the first time, I tried to find where I live, and I felt I'm going to be in one of those pink areas, and I am. So I am as concerned as everyone else in that area. My next question to you, and I think this links back also to a question from one of our audience members that came into me. So while we talk about maps and we talk about, large, broader level topics on sea level rise, first of all, how does this really disproportionately impact communities such as, women or low income communities more intensely than others? And how do you think that will look like in Mumbai? And the second part of the question, which kind of relates to this, is, other issues, economic vulnerabilities, the city's own development requirements, as the city grows and the population right now increases. How does this all complicate this entire discussion on sea level rise and helping mitigate or prevent further damage that we're doing to the city and the environment?
So as I go to your question, I think it's important to understand from the historic point of view of the city. The city is made up of islands, and the area you see in like a gray shade here is basically landfill that was done during the British era within the city. And this, reclamation of land is basically the area that you see here that is having concerns. And so if you match up this part of the city and that of the only area that's underwater, basically, Dheeraj, where you live, because I know where is part of the regular terrain, but everything else that was like mountainous is pretty secure, at least for now. The problem is the most vulnerable people that live within this fabric. Out here at the southernmost tip of the city of Mumbai, there are fishermen colonies that exist right now. Fishermen folks were one of the earliest communities that lived in Mumbai, even before the British era. And this is like the cultural sense of the city. And these are people that are living directly on the water. They have very small boats, and they typically go in the morning at around 3 or 4 a.m. And by 5, they are back with the produce of the day that they sell fresh fish farm. And so these, traditional local cultures are existing in pockets within the city, and they are very vulnerable to the situation. Beyond that, it's not just the vulnerability exists also for everybody who is living in the city in so many ways, because this is a very tight city. If you can imagine Manhattan and the tip of Manhattan and the amount of people that live there or should live there, let's just say because of the density of built environment that is there, that is the similar amount of density that is existing in Mumbai, built density. But in that built density, people actually live in this area. And so it affects them directly. This is their primary home. This is their primary place of income. And if you're, in many countries, retreat or adaptation and retreat is one of the key criteria that are used for sea level change conditions. And this is simply impossible in the situation of Mumbai, where you are taking and displacing millions of people from their original home. And that is why it is such an important question to be looked into.
Yeah, I remember actually 5 a.m. you mentioned that you took the students that came into Mumbai on one of your studio projects, actually to see these fishermen come back in, not realizing that this is something we're going to talk to about 2 years later in a very different context from what we really wanted to show the students at that time. I've said this a lot. I've heard you say this a lot. I think I've heard a lot of people globally say this a lot. And we call it climate change mitigation, and we call it climate change mitigation strategies. If you can maybe shed some light about, this particular term that's thrown out, maybe in context with your own work, I think it'll help us come to terms about what you're thinking and planning of doing, maybe.
Yes, I'm going to stop the share for a second, just so that it's easy for us to talk, but I can also proceed with the mitigation part very well. So there are two terms that typically get used in the discussion related to sea level rise. One is mitigation and the other is adaptation. And these two terms seem very similar, but they have a slight difference in the way the approach works. Mitigation is you are trying to stop what is happening, and you are going to be able to create solutions that will further enhance the stopping and allow people to be able to stay. Whereas adaptation is you're going to be okay with the change that's going to happen because there is no other solution for it, and you are adapting yourselves towards what needs to be done to make that a possible, way in which you're going to solve that situation. So in case of sea level rise in Mumbai, mitigation would be to find ways in which that sea level doesn't reach that marked area or level. And when it does reach, the way in which the urban development happens in that area is already mitigating and being able to solve that concern. Adaptation would be, one of the adaptation concerns is retreat, where you would basically say, we have to adapt to the changing environment, and we have to find a way in which you cannot build in those areas or certain areas that get left from being built. So these are two different solutions or methods. Adaptation, of course, has also other ways in which they get resolved, but this was just a quick way in which to explain that part.
Yeah, mitigation, adaptation, both are very important thoughts. And I think there's some cities in the US now where they're actually looking to adapt and move away from the coastline rather than figure out the mitigation strategies. And that's happening in other parts of the world as well. But while mitigation is important for us to really consider, can we really reverse climate change, specifically with reference to sea level rise? I know, we're talking about the polar ice caps melting, the sea level rising because of this increase in temperature. But is there anything that we can really do to help reverse this in any particular way, or do we only have to think about adaptation or mitigation?
No, I think reverse would be a very strong word. I think, none of us as yet have found the solution to say, okay, we can reverse this situation. But one thing that we are looking into is to find a good, if you look at the Laudato Si, which is Pope Francis's document related to how we can work with sustainable solutions. The part that he talks about, and also something that we are examining as part of the work we are doing, is to see how the built environment actually balances natural environment. So natural environment is not something that needs to go away just because the built environment is coming in. A classic example of this is go to Google Maps and look up your city, and it'll look very, very green. Now, once you look at it as it's very green, check how much is really forest land in comparison to cultivated land. Now, why is this important? Forest land is absolutely diverse, has a great ecosystem attached to it, whereas cultivated land is mono-agricultural generally and does not allow for the kind of, an ecosystem to survive in the same way as forest land would. In the United States, there is a huge depletion of forest land. In Asia, there is a huge depletion of forest land. In Asia, there is depletion of water and forest land. And so what is happening is, because these issues are existing, they are cumulatively causing the heating up impact, or the heat island effect is another way to look at this. So if we design cities in manners where you create the balance between nature and built environment in a better way, then we are reducing in the city itself the heat island effect that's causing carbon, levels of heat and temperature rise. And then on the other side, if you maintain forests such that they are able to help with percolation of water, help with increasing water tables, help in reducing the temperature around cities, all of this can help in total to work comprehensively towards reduction in carbon emissions and creation of lower temperatures. I'm just trying to say this very briefly, but actually there's a whole lot of study around that it's very difficult to explain in the short time we have. But there are parts of this study that include a lot related to compact planning of cities. The cities don't, sprawl out like the way we are sprawling them today, that we actually design them in a manner that they are having a good relationship with, green spaces within the framework of the city itself, that these are actually interconnected, that allow human beings to feel great, but also allow that biodiversity to exist. All of this comes together in, helping us, I would say the word mitigate, not maybe reverse as yet. I think first we need to even get to the point where we stop that change that's happening rapidly right now. And then at some point we can talk about reversing the situation.
Yeah, I look forward to that day when we start thinking of reversal rather than just mitigation. You mentioned earlier when we started this conversation about how you are on the advisory with NASA, and I think you've provided certain inputs even to the government here in India. We all realize these committees exist. We do see the reports that come out. The IPCC AR6 that we discussed has inputs from a lot of these committees. But can you maybe just enlighten us a little bit on how these interdisciplinary expert, groups, advisories, committees are really working to bring about these changes, aside from the reports that we read?
So there are, the AR6 report that you're referring to, and then the latest NOAA information that has just come out related to 2050 projections, which are much more concerning than the 2100 projections that were made a couple of, last year even, is just to increase the understanding between people of how alarming the situation is. Again, remembering that these are projections. These are projections based on how they have seen the course of, data that was collected since 1983. So NASA has been collecting data since 1983 on various ways in which this, the temperatures around the world are behaving, the sea, the glacial melt, the ways in which these cities are in relation to the water levels. All of this data has been collected for over 3 decades. And then they have been examining this, and that's how they have been creating these projections. Now, what is interesting is NOAA and NASA each were independently doing their own studies. And only in recent years have all these started coming together. So now the US Corps of Engineers, NOAA, NASA, and all other agencies, even the state, are coming together to say, let's have a comprehensive way in which we are mapping this information. Now, this is happening in the United States. Not everywhere else are we seeing the same way of impact. And that's why the AR6 is an international group of people that's trying to get that same level of competence and deliverables being created worldwide. To bring that attention to various places. Europe has its own system that is also good, but again, the cities getting impacted are still examining the impact of this sea level rise. There are only a few cities that have actually started creating solutions and then moving quickly with urban design methods of approach for combining the two. One great example for that is San Francisco, and also right now Manhattan is creating actually a development around the Battery area for mitigating the sea level rise impact in that place. New Orleans has been doing some. Miami is thinking about it, so.
I think this conversation is important for us to have on how are we making change on the ground. But another very important aspect when you really look at any sort of climate change measures is policy, government policy or global policy more than just any particular government. There's more and more a call that we try and create a coherent policy across all nations rather than each one thinking of what they need to do for their own borders, because climate change really isn't going to work, based on your individual policy, but on what's happening around you as well. So, I'm going to throw out a question that's going to put you in the hot seat in the sense that you're a global leader now. What policy changes do you think need to really be made when we talk about climate change?
And because you put me on a hot seat, I'm just opening up one slide that I hadn't opened up before that I want to show. But I used the term comprehensive planning before. And I'm going to repeat that, but I'm going to explain what that means. And another term for that is integrated planning. And integrated planning is when you're taking research work that has been done on a site, and people have understood, but you're working with the same scientists. You're not separating them. You're not looking at it as a separate result. You're working with the same scientists to then create solutions that are adapted with planners, with people that are engineers. We are bringing in climate experts. You're bringing in environmental experts, and you're getting them all together along with policymakers and government entities. And then that allows for a comprehensive planning to take place in relationship to opinions and thought processes that each person brings to the table. And this is the part that is absolutely needed for proceeding in a manner that would make sense for the near future. Because without that, the scientists will keep on giving us information sets. We will understand it, but it's not taking us as far as we need to go to be able to get to that question that you talked about before, which is how can we not just mitigate, but reverse, right? So until we understand what we are facing, which is a complicated question, and it can start becoming a difficult issue to deal with. But until we do that, it is absolutely problematic in many ways. So let me share with you this is a presentation in which I can talk about here. This is what I was talking about with the natural environment and the built environment, where you are looking at the correlationship of both and that they coexist. It's not one taking over the other, but the natural symbiosis that needs to exist between these to make them fundamentally viable. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is integrated design solutions, where planners are working together with policymakers. And then these policy makers actually are the ones who decide and are able to implement immediately policies that then influence other people that can help development to move in the right direction. But it has to be done together. It has to be done simultaneously to make that into a viable solution.
Yeah, I think this is a key part about making change. The fact that, if you look at this particular slide, very often each of these bubbles works on its own. And, climate expert would say, we need to make these changes without really thinking of the reality on the ground, or the policymakers would decide, the bare minimum without realizing, what's needed. I think this is a very important part of our conversation. And as you rightly pointed out, I think this also points to the important role of planners and policymakers working together, not just any one of these groups really doing anything by itself. So earlier this year, if you remember, President Jenkins, Father John, came out with a call to care for our common home based on the Laudato Si. So just taking that in mind, how do you think the work that we are doing currently in Mumbai, how will this really benefit a more global community? Can we replicate the successes that we're doing in one city like Mumbai directly to other coastal communities, maybe, in other parts of the world where, our audience as well as others are logging in to listen in on?
So you brought an important point. I didn't talk about the political decision makers before, but they are the key to make anything happen, right? So it is important that they are part of the conversation too. Father Jenkins has been someone who has been responsive to this for quite some time. He actually got, this whole discussion that happened with the College of Business on a dialogue at Vatican related to the main companies that are responsible for, I want to use the term, some of the concerns related to climate, and brought them together and asked them to sign in the presence of Pope Francis this understanding that they would behave in a sustainable manner from here on. And that's the kind of political goodwill that you can bring to the table. When Laudato Si came out, it was in 2015, and I read it cover to cover, and I was so impressed by it that we started implementing that first thing in our Rome program at that time. And now, 7 years later, it has impacted me and my work so much that it's actually transforming the way the research that I'm doing is conducted. So I would say it's an integral part of how one proceeds with looking at things in a manner that are not independent of each other, but how they actually connect and relate. And if we do things the right way, they actually impact for the betterment of society in general, and not just one element of it, but or one subset of people, but moreover everybody together.
Yeah, I think your last sentence, everybody together, is really, really important when we think about these sort of changes. These are necessary. There was something I read once about the fact that we are not saving our planet for our future generations. We are actually borrowing it from them. and it's our responsibility to give something back that is better than what we borrowed. I have another question for you, and I think this relates a little bit to the way Notre Dame is structured. I work with Notre Dame International that has 12 different locations globally in terms of gateways and centers. Maybe if you can just shed some light on how NDI or Notre Dame International has really been able to, support this challenge that was posed to you, or this particular project. How has this, partnership really worked for you?
Well, it wouldn't have happened without the work and effort of NDI and of yours, Dheeraj. So I remember, and now I'm going to stop sharing this screen, but I'm going to bring the story that we had from the students. I came in 2019 to India, and we were doing this work that we wanted to do in Mumbai on urban planning. And it's this collaboration started at that time. And since then, it's been just amazing. The partnership, the support, the infrastructure, the help, everything that NDI has given has made it possible, not for just us to be able to do this research, but for our group of students. Every year, up to 11 to 12 students from School of Architecture are able to go to Mumbai and experience this study firsthand. They're able to experience being within the culture and the community, and being able to take that information and learn about a different way in which they need to plan and design and build. And so all of that has come through efforts that have come through your work, Dheeraj, but also through NDI's support. Especially, I must thank Michael Pippinger and Jonathan Noble also for their time and energy and their support that they have given. I would say that we definitely need this kind of support going forward, so that we are able to move in a manner that would allow this kind of study not just to be experienced, but also to be taken as an example of study that can be replicated in different places globally. And so NDI's stationing and placement as a global player makes a huge difference in creating this impact, not just for the city of Mumbai, but in other places and other cities of need.
I have another Notre Dame related question. I know we've spoken a lot about the urban plan aspect of sea level rise, specifically for Mumbai, but there are a lot of different faculty and research interests for this project that go beyond urban plan and architecture. Maybe if you could just shed some light on the kind of faculty that are working on this project with you, because I know they come from certain disciplines that sometimes people don't realize, work into this sort of a project. So maybe if you could help share some of those details with us as well, it would be really nice.
Yeah, see, I have all these slides everywhere, but so this is, for example, the team that is putting this information together. The key people or the key team members are basically computer science, engineering, of course, NDI, and School of Architecture coming together. In this, we are working also with original data sets from NASA and University of Colorado. University of Colorado has done some studies on measuring the contours of the city of Mumbai, and they have worked on land subsidence. And so we are taking some of their data sets to examine which areas are potentially the most vulnerable. And then we are going to do ground studies in those areas. And also, of course, with the Municipal Commission of Mumbai. Along with this, we are having partners. I've mentioned the first project we are examining this in detail is with the Mumbai Port Trust. But because this is in agreement phase right now, I'm not mentioning the name as yet in this slide directly. But what we are doing further to this is we are collaborating with various agencies. The State Department, the US Consulate in Mumbai has been of immense support to us. We have also been working with the US Trade Department, and we are working with the US Army Corps of Engineers and with the Indian agency or the Indian counterpart for urban affairs to see what would be a good future collaborative effort. So some of these partnerships are in discussions and conversations. Some of them are ready to hit the ground and have already been moving forward. And some of them already are in progress. And we have, for example, we've collected various data sets already now, and we are examining them in depth to understand which areas are of potential concern. The faculty members we have been engaging with, and this is not a complete list as yet, but Nitesh Chawla from Lucy Institute, and then of course engineering, Alan Hamlet. We also have Jason Rohr, we have Tracy Korea, and we also have the Dean of Engineering, Patricia Cullingan, who are interested in moving this forward. Along with in this computer science, Chaoli Wang has been working for years now on DHARMA work, and so he and his team is also supporting the work that we are doing. And of course, Dheeraj, you're an integral part of this in Mumbai. So
there is a really large team looking at this. We also have a really large audience listening in, and I think a question that everyone thinks about when they consider climate change, that it's such a big problem and it needs a big solution. But I always feel that, and this is how I've tried to maintain things in all my discussions, is it all starts with the individual. So maybe an interesting question before we move on to the audience questions is how can an individual help, not in terms of climate change, but individually, how can we make those changes? Either in our lives or elsewhere?
That's a beautiful question, and it's actually very, very important. When you see these kind of big concerns, we always feel, oh, that's something that somebody else may have to solve instead of one individual. Actually, this whole thing started with just, okay, what can I do? And I know that there are people out there that will help if in case you take this up on yourself. So a simple way to start is start with your daily routines. As students or as faculty or as people that are in the field or people just generally as community members, one of the easiest things to do is to see where we are either polluting the planet, reducing the green footprint of the cities, or we are doing anything that is not going to be recyclable or in any way creating carbon emission. If we can answer these three questions, that in my daily life, what am I doing against it? I think you're already helping the situation quite well. If we don't do anything about it, then things will continue to become a problem as it goes further.
Yeah, I think the takeaway I took from that is it's not somebody else's problem to solve. I think it's all of us need to do a little bit to make sure that we are part of the solution and not part of the problem. And I know that's a very cliche thing to say, but it's factual. I have quite a few questions from the audience, and I'm going to start with a very interesting one that came up early in our discussion. How will sea level rise impact water supplies? Now, that's I love the fact, because on one side, we are seeing an increase in water in the sense that the coastlines are going up, but how will that really impact supply of water or water that we can use?
Yeah, so one way to think about this is the amount of water that gets depleted from the land. And I'm going to share again a slide for this, because slides speak more than sometimes words do. And so an easy way to understand this is sea level rise is generally salt water. It's water that is not drinkable water. Generally land, the normal regular water we find around us comes from rainfall and then its percolation within the soil. The minute we start building urban infrastructure that's not allowing the percolation of that soil, it's going to create water tables to be reduced. The other concern that water tables are reduced is when people consume the water and it's not replenished again. And so when that starts happening, there are areas or pockets created within the substrata of the land that are left empty or are create places which can collapse. Now, this is where salt water generally finds its way because of the close proximity between the sea level water and the salt water. And if that happens, then you have contaminated your major source of sweet water around you, and then you have lost your only source of water for drinkable water. And conversion of sea level water from like salt water to sweet water is possible today, but is extremely non-economical, and so makes it complicated to try and even do that. And an easy way is to actually create natural methods of growing trees that have deep roots, and these roots allow, and this kind of like, the soil being penetrated with ways in which it's opened up to absorb more water is the best solution one can have for increasing the water table of that area.
Another question we have, and I think you've answered this a bit, but I'll still throw it out there to you, that should we add migration to mitigation and adaptation? Climate change is already causing a significant amount of migration globally.
Yes, so imagine, I'm going to give you some numbers now. In India, we've crossed the 1 billion mark. We have so many people that are living in a very small piece of land that when you talk about migration, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to do that. The depletion of water is a primary crisis in India. And beyond that, if you talk about them moving, where will people go? The reasoning of employment and being able to facilitate for families is a critical criteria. When water leaves a place, it also creates this situation that the situation that you're facing in LA and San Francisco is, which is you start having drying up of trees and the possibility of more fires happening. And then after that, the next stage after that is you get very high heat and temperatures, and then it becomes extremely difficult to stay in those conditions. So it's a cyclic thing that the more these kind of natural resources leave the location, the more difficult it becomes for people to survive in that area. And then migration is the only option that remains. But if migration is like the last resource we should get to, I think if we can find ways intermediate, there are ways and scientific studies that have been done about sand or like areas that have really very little vegetation possibilities can be converted back into better resources or cultivatable land, and then again to increase the water capacity of that land. This comes from a simple thing like mangroves and the intent of keeping mangroves and building mangroves. It's not just about maintaining the ones you have, but actually putting in new ones. And they serve various purposes. They help break the wave from sea level rise impact. There's actual studies that show how waves get the level and the capacity is reduced from them. And at the same time, they help with soil replenishment. This will allow for people to slow down the clock, and mitigation or migration concerns will be reduced in a high number. Migration just simply means we are not solving the problem. We are going to the next place to create a new problem.
I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to ask you one last question while I do have a few more. And this is a relatively large question, but it relates to your expertise in urban design. You mentioned the compact city design could be used to improve land use and possibly mitigate the outcomes of climate change. However, we can observe that as societies get more affluent, people tend to move to the suburbs. Do you think it should be the architects or urban planners' responsibility to educate their client and discourage them from moving to housing districts outside cities? Or can a meaningful change be only achieved by enforcing zoning ordinances?
I think
Yeah, it's a
both.
long question, but
no, but I think it's both. So there is information that comes to the client, but there is information that goes back to the people that are, people that are policymakers. So for example, I talked about Mumbai Port Trust before. Mumbai Port Trust has also been working with us on these solutions, but at the same time, they themselves have in-house urban planners. Dilip Shaker is one of them who has been doing an incredible job. And he basically, what they're doing is they're creating policies that will help create density within the fabric that they're developing, such that people can live in compact areas instead of trying to go more into suburbia. And so it is the responsibility of the planner to inform, but it's also a balance between client and policymakers and making sure that both sides understand.
Thank you, Krupali. I'm going to stop the questions at this point because we are almost at the hour. I thank you so much. I know you just landed into Rome a few hours back, and I know you have an important book launch tomorrow, and you've still taken time out to discuss this really important topic. I'd also like to thank everyone who's joined in today. We invite you to continue this conversation on the discussion board that has been set up on LinkedIn. I know there are some questions that are unanswered. Maybe that's something that could, invigorate a good conversation on those discussion boards. Next week, we'll travel to Mexico, the Mexico Global Center, where we will discuss the water crisis in Mexico City. These videos have already been uploaded on ThinkND with a short explainer video by Professor Alejandro Estefan from the Keough School of Global Affairs. And my friend and director, Mike Talbot, will be moderating the discussion next week. So I request all of you review the videos, review the material on ThinkND, come prepared to discuss again. Also feel free to share the series with friends, colleagues, anyone who's interested. We are accepting registrations throughout the program. As each of these meetings, you can see they're very different topics. While they integrate with water, I think each of them really is a standalone topic by itself. Having said that, and realizing that we are at the hour, being mindful for everyone, I would like to once again thank you, Krupali, for this really interesting conversation. And thank you to all who have attended and made this, brought in these lovely questions for us to answer as well. Have a good day, good evening, or good night, wherever you are, and let's stay safe. Bye, everyone.
Bye.